Have you seen this illusion before? The spinning circles illusion? So what's going on here? The circles are spinning, but they're not actually changing position or shape. That's the illusion. Oh. Now, first of all, the arrows have nothing to do with it. They're not causing the illusion. They're not using the power of suggestion to get you to see direction or movement or shape. You can cover them up, as you see here, and you'll still see the illusion. If I cover everything but the edges, you'll see they're not changing position, but you might think you still see a little up and down motion. That's because of the shifting pattern of light and dark from the colors, causing your brain to misinterpret the edge of the circle. That's going to be important later. So what's going on? There are a lot of processes and effects all converging at once to produce this illusion. It's an interaction of the eyes and the brain, as well as the experience the brain has gained over time from interacting with the three-dimensional visual world, such as understanding that objects get smaller as they go further away, that an object that appears pretty big far away is probably a lot bigger than it is, that colors do not change on a wall just because there's a shadow falling on it or because the light changes across it somewhere. But let's start at the beginning of the process. Visual cortex in the occipital lobe, which processes vision, including different pathways for angles, color, and motion. It's the motion pathways that are a big driver in seeing the circle change position and shape. How do we know? Because you can make the effect go away by blinking very fast while you look at it. This interruption continuously resets the image hitting the retina, therefore resets the processing in the visual cortex. Your brain is always interpreting the signals it's receiving to help you make sense of the world, and sometimes it makes assumptions when the data coming from the eyes is incomplete or not of the highest quality. What do I mean by that? First, let's look at this familiar illusion, the checkerboard illusion. It's one of my favorites. Typical checkerboard, cylinder to one side, casting a shadow across part of the board. That's important. You'll notice that A and B look like they're different colors, but when we isolate them, we actually see they are the same color. What sort of sorcery is this? Oh, first, color constancy. I mentioned how we perceive color being the same on a wall even when there's shadows across the wall. Same thing is going on here. Color constancy is correcting for the shadow, causing us to perceive that a color in the shadow is actually lighter than it appears. Remember this one? The blue dress, gold dress. If you see it as a blue dress with black trim, your brain is simply taking the image at face value. If you see it as white with gold trim, your brain is actually noticing the bright background and making the assumption that the side of the dress you're looking at is in shadow. Therefore, what appears to be blue must actually be white in shadow. What appears to be black must be gold in shadow. That doesn't mean anything else about your personality traits, your past experience, emotionally or anything like that. It's just, what does your eye grab when it first looks at the picture? And this is part of what's happening with the checkerboard. The other part of the checkerboard illusion is called the contrast effect. Notice A has lighter squares around it and B has darker squares around it. A has lighter squares around it, causing it to look a little darker by comparison. B has darker squares around it, making it look a little lighter by comparison. This causes A to be perceived a little darker, B to be perceived a little lighter from what they actually are. It's much like this contrast effect. Each of these bars is a uniform color, but if you look at the edges where the bars touch each other, it almost looks like the color is starting to fade a little bit as they get close. It's not. They are consistent colors. This is your perception of the shade of the color being influenced by the nearby contrasting color. Why might this happen? The construction of the eye is a part of this issue. There are over 100 million receptors, rods and cones, in each eye, but only 10 million nerves that comprise the optic nerves coming out of each eye, which means the brain does not receive individual signals from each receptor cell in the eye. It receives the signal of clusters of receptors. This doesn't matter too much because there's nothing we could perceive that is so tiny it would only fire off one receptor. Even the smallest dot you could perceive is firing off thousands of receptors all at once. But this limitation means signals from other receptors can bleed over into the signals being processed by nearby receptors. And the visual cortex makes some assumptions due to this when putting together your visual perception. An example of this is the blind spot. In each eye, you have an area where there are no receptors at all. Therefore, you're processing nothing from the visual field in that area, but you don't perceive blank dots floating in front of you all the time because the visual cortex in your brain takes information from around the blind spot and fills in the empty space that your eye isn't sending any information for. It's assuming that the blind spot contains the same thing as the area around the blind spot. How can you see this? Well, look at these two images. Close your left eye, look at the object on the left, and move closer to the screen. As you get closer, the object on the right will eventually disappear. You can do the same by closing your right eye and getting gradually closer to the object on the right. That'll make the object on the left disappear. In each of these cases, you've hit the blind spot in each eye, and the brain is assuming that whatever is in that space should be whatever is around it. In this case, it's wrong and made an object disappear. Another problem with the eye is your peripheral vision. Only the object you're focused on at any given moment is particularly clear because your focus lands on the fovea, which is the densest concentration of cones in your eye. Cones need light to perform well, but are very good at detail and color. As you move away from the fovea toward your peripheral vision, you have fewer cones, more rods. Rods are great at low light perception, but they're very poor at detail and color. What's an example of how poor your rods are at perceiving color? If you take different colored cards and hold them out at arm's length on either side, make sure you don't know what they are ahead of time. Hold them out at arm's length just behind you and start moving them gradually into your visual field. Keep your eyes forward. You'll notice early on you can tell the light and dark from them, but notice how close you have to get to the center of your vision before you can actually perceive the color of them. That's because as you come in, you're collecting more cones on your retina, and they can actually perceive color pretty well. So what about the poor detail aspect of peripheral vision in the rods? Can we play with that? Yeah, we can. You've probably seen this one before. These are sets of celebrity faces. I'm going to flip through several sets of faces, but keep your focus on the crosshairs in the center of the screen and only look at the faces with your peripheral vision. Because it's mostly rods that are detecting the faces, and rods are poor detail, they're going to send low quality signals to the visual cortex. So your visual cortex is going to do what it does, and it's going to start filling in with whatever information it has. The result is kind of a distorted and cartoonish perception of the faces. You can even glance over at the faces now and then as this goes through to notice I'm not messing with you, or pause the video and look at the faces so you can see what's going on. All of these are working on the checkerboard illusion to distort A and B into being perceived as different than their true shades, which brings us back to the spinning circles illusion. You can make the illusion stop by blinking quickly. We mentioned that, but what else is going on? Earlier I pointed out that isolating the edges shows you that the circle is not moving left or right, but you do perceive a little up and down motion in that, caused by the cycling light and dark. Can this be stopped too? It actually can. A big issue with the circle is that it's a hollow circle. It's not a solid disc. If it were a solid disc, we would still see the rotation, but it would not appear to be changing location or shape. In fact, with a solid disc, you can produce other illusions. Newton's color disc, in which the colors blend together to either show a faint rainbow or disappear altogether and become white. The Benham disc, and this one is black and white with some black lines, you'll notice, on the white half. If you spin it fast enough, and you might start to perceive some of those black lines as being kind of reddish or bluish. Let's run this one and see if you can kind of see that. What's the difference about a solid disc? it only has one anchor point for its rotation, which is the outside border of the disc. With our spinning circle, it actually has two anchor points. It has the outside border of the circle and the inside border of the circle, and that's the problem. Why? Well, let's take the circle apart and show you another illusion. You'll notice these pieces are the same size, but if I put one above the other, it looks smaller. If I move it below the other, it looks larger. Why? Because your eye is comparing the two nearer surfaces, not the parallel surfaces. And the top of one is smaller than the bottom of the other. Therefore, your brain gives you the illusion that the size of the object has changed. It's different, but similar to how the brain alters your perception of these objects. The two lines here are the same size, but your brain is considering the three-dimensional context of the picture. Therefore, if two objects are the same size on your retina, the one that's supposed to be further away must be larger, because your brain understands from its real-world experience that objects appear smaller the further away they are. This illusion also influences your brain's perception of speed. Let's look at a piece of the circle again. Imagine this is a section of track and people are going to race along it. One end is the starting line, the other end is the finish line. If everyone starts at the same time and everyone crosses the finish line at the same time, was everyone running the same speed? No, because the people on the outside had further to run. Therefore, they had to be running faster than the people on the inside track. Your brain makes this assumption too, which means it's perceiving parts of the circle as moving at different speeds. Now, let's put it all together. That little up and down illusion you saw when we isolated the edges of the circle, your brain is perceiving that all the way around the circle, which wouldn't be a problem if it was a solid disc, but it's not. It's perceiving that movement all around the outside border of the circle and all around the inside border of the circle. And as it tries to process these variations, the parts of the visual cortex that process speed, angle, and direction assume a motion that's not there and create the illusion of movement and the illusion of distortion. Why does the illusion change direction and shape instead of just continuing in one direction? Because the circle's not actually moving. So the illusion can only extend a certain distance before the brain has to alter the illusion to stay within the limited space. And that's how the illusion works. Simple, right?